All right. Let me try to land with where I am on this journey, all right? The Sermon on the Mount is not a blueprint. It's to show you how God acts. It's to show you what God is really like. You will find it impossible to live up to, of course. Why? Because you're not God. Why is this so hard for us? You're never going to be able to live up to this. This is what God would do if He were here. He was here. You wouldn't be offended if I said to you, hey, you're not going to do as well as Jesus tomorrow. You would say, yeah, I mean, the no-brainer. That was a real spirit of prophecy. Of course I'm not going to do as well as Jesus tomorrow. So why, when you read the Sermon on the Mount, would you look at it as an instruction in which Jesus says, jump up to this rung until you realize you can't jump and then quit trying to jump and I'll save you by grace. And then you can just ignore the Sermon on the Mount because you didn't need to do it anyway. It was really just to humiliate you in your effort so that you would come and let me do it through you. No, it's not a blueprint for how to live. It's instructions for what God would do. How would God treat the poor? How would God treat His enemy? How would God treat His persecutor? How would God treat His bride? Like when you get to the divorce passage, one of the reasons no one teaches the Sermon on the Mount. Because Jesus goes, don't let a divorced woman marry. If she remarries, you make her commit adultery. A lot of us just close the Bible right there and go, well, I'm not going to teach this because half my church got divorced. What am I going to get up and say about this? You're going to send people under condemnation until you start to realize that it's God saying to you, I don't leave you. You and I don't divorce. Because that would force you into adultery. And you go, oh, wait a minute. I should probably wrestle with divorce. Not use it as a back door in case things get wrong. Things get heated. He's not asking me to base my righteousness on whether or not I get divorced. He's telling me I'm not going to divorce you. I'm not going to leave you. And when you can start to see that, yes, it's impossible. Of course you're going to find it impossible. But we have grace. Grace that says, neither do I condemn thee. Grace that says, therefore now there is no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus. And because we're in Christ Jesus, we're not condemned beneath the weight of the Sermon on the Mount. We are propelled upward with the Sermon on the Mount. We look up and go, this is how God would treat my enemy. This is how God would treat my persecutor. This is how God handles lying and anger and adultery and envy and jealousy. I'm not supposed to read these and wallow in the carpet and fall apart. I'm supposed to read these and wrestle with how I'm treating my neighbor. And maybe if I realize that I love the Lord my God and I love my neighbor as myself, I'll never get over the Sermon on the Mount. I'll be bothered by it forever because it's really what God would do if He walked the earth. And I don't have to make excuses. I don't have to trade in my citizenship card and figure out which ones apply and which one don't. God, who is timeless and never changes, never stopped loving unlovable people. He never stopped caring for the poor. He never became unconcerned with the marginalized and the minority and those who have been ignored. In fact, it's all He talks about in that sermon because maybe, just maybe, it's what He wants His church thinking about. Maybe it's what He wants His church shouting about and praying about and spending money on and spending time with. And when you get to the 7 churches in Asia, it's obvious they didn't read the Sermon on the Mount. At least not all of them. I mean, we just posted Laodicea last week, right? If you go back and watch the Laodicea message we did in our monthly meeting and listen to Laodicea, we're rich, we're increased with goods, we have need of nothing. And Jesus is standing in the midst and goes, but don't you realize that you're actually poor and miserable and wretched and blind and naked? Open the door. You're the kind of person I like to eat with. I got some stuff for you. I've been looking for people like you forever. Church, this is who we're supposed to be opening the door for. And the Sermon on the Mount tells us this. It's not an introduction to legalism. It's an introduction to the constant wrestling with how we move through the world. Why love our enemies? Why turn the other cheek? Why avoid divorce? Why not hold grudges? Why not lie? Why not lust? Every one of these are in the Sermon on the Mount. I just picked a few. Just a few. Sermon on the Mount's loaded. It's like a machine gun of stuff that just keeps coming at you. It's rough. There are moments in the Sermon on the Mount where I have to just close it and go, I'm going to go read some identity stuff by Paul. And Jesus just keeps firing it at you. Why not? Why not do all these? It's because these instructions show us how God acts. It shows us God's actions with the other cheek. God's actions in our heavenly marriage. Does God hold a grudge? Does God lie? Does God lust? You go, well, of course He doesn't. And that's the point of Jesus, is to say, there's a moment in the Sermon on the Mount where he goes, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And you're going to get to that one and think, oh boy, that's a tall task. And I know we take that theologically and we go, we are perfect in Christ. Absolutely. But Jesus isn't asking you for your spiritual standing. He's asking you how you're looking for your neighbor. And then you go, okay, I got some work to do. Good! That's great! That's wonderful! That's excellent! Yes! Yes! Land on I've got work to do. Land there. That's great. Because if you land there, you've got work to do with Jesus inside of you. You go, God, let's go love somebody today. Put me in the path of someone today. Let's go present this to the world. It's because these instructions show us how God acts. We're followers of Jesus. In Jesus we see God. You want to know what God looks like? Watch Jesus. You want to know how God acts? Listen to Jesus. Listen to the Sermon on the Mount. Let me show you how this thing ends, all right? Because it could be a while before we get through the Sermon on the Mount. Let me show you how the sermon ends. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. I'm going to close right here. Therefore, listen to how Jesus closes this message. Whoever hears these sayings and does them, I consider that guy a wise man who built his house on the rock. When the rain descends and the floods come and the winds blow and beat on the house, it doesn't fall because it was founded on the rock. So you can take this sermon and do something with it. He goes, I consider you pretty smart if you do. Because guess what's going to happen? The stuff of chaos in this world, you're going to avoid a bunch of it because you're going to be planted on the rock. Why? Because you're not lying to people and anger people and you're not smacking people back and all the stuff the Sermon on the Mount has you do. He goes, you'll end up building. What about the guy that listens to it and doesn't do it? Well, that's a lot of us. Jesus goes, he's a foolish man, built his house on the sand. The rain descends, the floods come, the winds blow, beat on the house, it falls. Great was its fall. Sand living, right? What do we do with the Sermon on the Mount? We're going to wrestle with this baby. We're going to work on this together over the next however long it takes. Next week, we are going to jump into the Beatitudes. We are going to see this word in the Greek that has been watered down to a word no one ever uses, Beatitudes, and is way closer in the Greek to you lucky dog. It really is. It's really close to blissful, and it holds a connotation of the lucky ones. Lucky is the poor in spirit. Lucky are the merciful. Lucky, you lucky dog.